In the House of the Dragon adaptation, Lord Lionel Strong said something interesting.
King Jaehaerys ruled over half a century of peace while his children drove him to the edge of madness. His daughters in particular.
One of those daughters was Saera Targaryen. Saera was one of the only 3 children to outlive her mother and one of the only 2 to outlive her father. That raises the question, why didn't the Iron Throne pass to her instead of her nephew Viserys? In this video, we are going to go over the full life of this unique character, Saera Targaryen. In 67 AC, Queen Alysanne gave birth to her 9th child and 5th daughter, Saera. Princess Saera came into the world red-faced and squalling. She was a trial from the very start. Tempestuous, demanding, disobedient. The first word she spoke was no, and she said it often and loudly. She refused to be weaned until past the age of 4. Even as she ran about the castle, talking more than her siblings Vaegon and Daela combined, she wanted her mother's milk and raged and screamed whenever the queen dismissed another wet nurse. "7 save us," Alysanne whispered to the king one night. "When I look at her, I see Arya." Fierce and stubborn, Saera Targaryen thrived upon attention and sulked when she did not receive it. Princess Saera was 3 years younger than her sister Daela, but Saera had all the courage that her sister lacked, along with a voracious hunger for milk, for food, for affection, for praise. As a babe, she did not so much cry as scream, and her ear-piercing wails became the terror of every maid in the Red Keep. She wants what she wants, and she wants it now, Grand Maester Elessar wrote of the princess in 69 AC when she was only 2. 7 save us all when she is older. The Dragon Keepers had best lock up the dragons. He had no notion how prophetic those words would be. Septon Barth was more reflective as he observed the princess at the age of 12 in 79 AC. She is the king's daughter and well aware of it. Servants see to her every need, though not always as quickly as she might like. Great lords and handsome knights show her every courtesy. The ladies of the court defer to her. Girls of her own age vie with one another to be her friends. All this Saera takes as her due. If she were the king's firstborn, or better, still his only child, she would be well content. Instead, she finds herself the 9th born, with 6 living siblings who are older than her and even more adored. Aemon is to be king. Balon most like will be his hand. Alyssa may be all her mother is and more. Vaegon is more learned than she is, Miguel is holier, and Daela. When does a day go by when Daela is not in need of comfort? And whilst she is being soothed, Saera is being ignored. Such a fierce little thing she is, they say. She has no need of comfort. They are wrong in that, I fear. All men need comfort. Arya Targaryen had once been thought to be wild and willful, given to acts of disobedience. But Princess Saera's girlhood made Arya seem a model of decorum by comparison. The border between innocent pranks, wanton mischief, and acts of malice is not always discerned by one so young, but there can be no doubt that the princess crossed it freely. She was forever sneaking cats into her sister Daela's bedchamber, knowing that she was frightened of them. Once, she filled Daela's chamber pot with bees. She slipped into the White Sword Tower when she was 10, stole all the white cloaks she could find, and dyed them pink. At 7, she learned when and how to steal into the kitchens to make off with cakes and pies and other treats. Before she was 11, she was stealing wine and ale instead. By 12, she was like as not to arrive drunk when summoned to the sept for prayer. The king's half-witted fool, Tom Turnip, was the victim of many of her japes and her unwitting catspaw for others. Once, before a great feast where many lords and ladies were to be in attendance, she persuaded Tom that it would be much funnier if he performed naked. It was not well received. Later, far more cruelly, she told him that if he climbed the Iron Throne, he could be king, but the fool was clumsy at the best of times and prone to tremors, and the throne sliced his arms and legs to pieces. "She is an evil child," her septa said of her afterward. Princess Saera had half a dozen septas and as many bedmaids before she turned 13. This is not to say that the princess was without her virtues. Her maesters affirmed that she was very clever, as bright as her brother Vaegon in her own way. She was certainly pretty, taller than her sister Daela, and not half so delicate, and as strong and quick and spirited as her sister Alyssa. When she wanted to be charming, it was hard to resist her. Her big brothers, Aemon and Balon, never failed to be amused by her mischief, though they never knew the worst of it. And long before she was half grown, Saera had learned the art of getting anything she wanted from her father. A kitten, a hound, a pony, a hawk, a horse. Jaehaerys drew a firm line at the elephant. Queen Alysanne was far less gullible, however, and Septon Barth tells us that Saera's sisters all misliked her to various degrees. Maidenhood became her, and Saera truly came into her own after her first flowering. After all they had endured with Daela, the king and queen must have been relieved to see how eagerly Saera took to the young men at court, and they to her. At 14, she told the king she meant to marry the Prince of Dorne, or perhaps the king beyond the wall, so she could be a queen like Mother. That year, a trader from the Summer Islands came to court. Far from shrieking at the sight of him as Daela had, Saera said she might like to marry him too. By 15, she had put such idle fantasies aside. Why dream of distant monarchs when she could have as many squires, knights, and likely lords as she desired? Dozens danced attendance on her, but 3 soon emerged as favorites. Jonah Moon was the heir to Maidenpool, Redroy Connaughton was a 15-year-old lord of Griffin's Roost, and Braxton Beesbury, called Stinger, was a 19-year-old knight, the finest lance in the Reach and the heir to Honeyhold. The princess had female favorites as well. Perianne Moore and Alice Turnberry, 2 maids of her own age, became her dearest friends. Saera called them Pretty Perry and Sweetberry. For more than a year, the 3 maids and the 3 young lords were inseparable at every feast and ball. They hunted and hawked together too, and once sailed across the Blackwater Bay to Dragonstone. When the 3 lords rode at rings or crossed swords in the yards, the 3 maids were there to cheer them on. King Jaehaerys, who was forever entertaining visiting lords or envoys from across the narrow sea, sitting at council or planning further roads, was very well pleased. They would not need to scour the realm to find a match for Saera when 3 such promising young men were at hand. Queen Alysanne was less convinced. Saera is clever, but not wise, she told the king. Lady Perianne and Lady Alice were pretty, vapid, empty-headed little fools from what she had seen of them, whilst Connaughton and Moon were callow boys. And I do not like this Stinger. I've heard he sired a bastard in the Reach and another here in King's Landing. Jaehaerys remained unconcerned. It is not as if Saera were ever alone with any of them. There are always people about, serving men and maids, grooms and men-at-arms. What mischief can they get up to with so many eyes around them? He did not like the answer when it came. One of Saera's japes was their undoing. On a warm spring night in 84 AC, shouts and screams from a brothel called the Blue Pearl drew the notice of 2 men of the city watch. The screams were coming from Tom Turnip, who was lurching helplessly in circles, trying to escape from half a dozen naked whores, whilst the patrons of the house laughed uproariously and shouted on the harlots. Jonah Moon, Redroy Connaughton, and Stinger Beesbury were amongst those patrons, each one drunker than the last. They had thought it would be funny to see old Turnip do the deed, Redroy admitted. Then Jonah Moon laughed and said the jape had all been Saera's notion, and what a funny girl she was. The watchman rescued the hapless fool and escorted him back to the Red Keep. The 3 lords they brought before Sir Robert Redwine, their commander. Sir Robert delivered them to the king, ignoring Stinger's threats and Connaughton's clumsy attempt to bribe him. It is never pleasant to lance a boil, Grand Maester Elessar wrote of the affair. You never know how much pus will come out or how badly it will smell. The pus that burst forth from the Blue Pearl would smell very badly indeed. The 3 drunken lords had sobered somewhat by the time the king confronted them from atop the Iron Throne and put up a bold front. They confessed to making off with Tom Turnip and bringing him to the Blue Pearl. None of them said a word concerning Princess Saera. When His Grace ordered Moon to repeat what he had said about the princess, he blushed and stammered and claimed the watchman had misheard. Jaehaerys finally ordered the 3 lordlings taken to the dungeons. Let them sleep in a black cell tonight. Mayhaps they will tell a different tale come morning. It was Queen Alysanne, knowing how close Lady Perianne and Lady Alice had been to the 3 lords, who suggested that they be questioned as well. Let me speak with them, your grace. If they see you up on the throne glaring down at them, they will be so frightened they will never say a word. The hour was late and her guardsmen found both girls asleep, sharing a bed in Lady Perianne's chambers. The queen had them brought before her in her solar. Their 3 young lords were in the dungeon, she told the girls. If they did not wish to join them, they would tell the truth. It was all she needed to say. Sweetberry and Pretty Perry stumbled over one another in their eagerness to confess. Before long, both of them were weeping and pleading for forgiveness. Queen Alysanne let them plead, never saying a word. She listened, as she had done before at 100 women's courts. Her Grace knew how to listen. It was just a game at the start, Pretty Perry said. Saera was teaching Alice how to kiss, so I asked her if she would teach me too. The boys train at fighting every morning. Why shouldn't we train at kissing? That's what girls are meant to do, isn't it? Alice Turnberry agreed. Kissing was sweet, she said, and one night we started kissing with our clothes off, and that was scary, but exciting. We took turns pretending we were boys. We never meant to be wicked, we were only playing. Then Saera dared me to kiss a real boy, and I dared Perry to do the same, and both of us dared Saera, but she said she would do us one better. She would kiss a man grown, a knight. That's how it began with Roy and Jonah and Stinger. Lady Perianne jumped back in then to say that afterward it was Stinger who did the training for all of them. He has 2 bastards, she whispered. One in the Reach and one right here on the Street of Silk. Her mother is a whore at the Blue Pearl. That was the only mention of the Blue Pearl. Neither of the trolls knew the slightest thing concerning poor Tom Turnip, as the irony would have it, Grandmaster Elisar would write afterward. But they knew a great deal about certain other things, none of which had been their fault. Where were your scepters during all of this? The queen demanded when she had heard them out. Where were your maids? And the lords? They would have been attended. Where were their grooms, their men-at-arms, their squires and serving men? Lady Perianne was confused by the question. We told them to wait without, she said, in the tone of one explaining that the sun rises in the east. They're servants. They do what you tell them. The ones who knew, they knew to keep quiet. Stinger said he'd have their tongues out if they talked, and Saera is smarter than the Septas. That was where Sweetberry broke down and began to sob and tear at her dressing gown. She was so sorry, she told the queen. She had never wanted to be bad. Stinger made her, and Saera said she was craven, so she showed them, but now she was with child, and she did not know who the father was, and what was she to do? All you can do tonight is go to bed, Queen Alysanne told her. On the morrow, we shall send a scepter to you, and you can make a confession of your sins. The mother will forgive you. My mother won't, said Alice Turnberry, but she went as she was told. Lady Perianne helped her sobbing friend back to her room. When the queen told him what she had learned, King Jaehaerys got scarce credit a word of it. Guards were sent forth, and a succession of squires, grooms, and maids were dragged before the Iron Throne for questioning. Many of them wound up in the dungeons with their masters once their answers had been heard. Dawn had come by the time the last of them had been led away. Only then did the king and queen send for Princess Saera. The princess surely knew that something was amiss when the Lord Commander of the King's Guard and the Commander of the City Watch appeared together to escort her to the throne room. It was never good when the king received you while seated on the Iron Throne. The Great Hall was almost empty when she was brought in. Only Grandmaster Elisar and Septon Barth had been summoned to bear witness. They spoke for the Citadel and the Starry Sept, and the king felt the need for their guidance, but there were things like to be said that day that his lords need never know. It is oft said that the Red Keep has no secrets, that there are rats in the walls who hear everything and whisper in the ears of sleepers by night. Mayhaps so, for when Princess Saera came before her father, she appeared to know all that had happened at the Blue Pearl and be not the least abashed. I told them to do it, but I never thought they would, she said lightly. That must have been so funny, Turnip dancing with the whores. Not for Tom, said King Jaehaerys from the Iron Throne. He is a fool, Princess Saera answered with a shrug. Fools are meant to be laughed at. Where's the harm in that? Turnip loves it when you laugh at him. It was a cruel jape, said Queen Alysanne. But just now, there are other matters that concern me more. I have been speaking with your ladies. Are you aware that Alice Turnberry is with child? It was only then that the princess came to realize that she was not there to answer for Tom Turnip, but far more shameful sins. For a moment, Saera was at a loss for words, but only for a moment. Then she gasped and said, "My sweet berry? Truly? What has she done? Oh, my sweet little fool." If Septon Bart's testimony is to be believed, a tear rolled down her cheek. Her mother was not moved. You know perfectly well what she has done, what all of you have done. We will have the truth from you now, child. And when the princess looked to her father, she found no comfort there. "Lie to us again, and it will go very much worse for you," King Jaehaerys told his daughter. "Your 3 lords are in the dungeons, you ought to know, and what you say next may determine where you sleep tonight." Saera crumbled then, and the words came tumbling out one after another in a rush, a flood that left the princess almost breathless. She went from denial to dismissal to quibbling to contrition to accusation to justification to defiance in the space of an hour, with stops at giggling and weeping along the way, Septon Bart would write. She never did it. They were lying. It never happened. How could they believe that? It was just a game. It was just a jape. Who said that? That was not how it happened. Everyone likes kissing. She was sorry. Perry started it. It was such fun. No one was hurt. No one ever told her kissing was bad. Sweetberry had dared her. She was so ashamed. Balon used to kiss Alyssa all the time. Once she started, she did not know how to stop. She was afraid of Stinger. The mother above had forgiven her. All the girls were doing it the first time she was drunk. She had never wanted to. It was what men wanted. Miguel said the gods forgive all sins. Jonah said he loved her. The gods had made her pretty. It was not her fault. She would be good from now on. It will be as if it never happened. She would marry Redwood Connington. They had to forgive her. She would never kiss a man again or do any of those other things. It wasn't her who was with child. She was their daughter. She was their little girl. She was a princess. If she were queen, she would do as she liked. Why wouldn't they believe her? They never loved her. She hated them. They could whip her if they wanted, but she would never be their slave. She took my breath away, this girl. There was never a mummer in all the land who gave such a performance, but by the end, she was exhausted and afraid, and her mask slipped. "What have you done?" the king said, when at last the princess ran out of words. "Seven save us. What have you done? Have you given one of these boys your maidenhead? Tell me true." "True?" said Saera. It was in that moment, with that word, that the contempt came out. "No. I gave it to all 3. They all think they were the first. Boys are such silly fools." Jaehaerys was so horrified he could not speak, but the queen kept her composure. You are very proud of yourself, I see. A woman grown and nearly 7 and 10. I am sure you think you have been very clever, but it is one thing to be clever and another to be wise. What do you imagine will happen now, Saera?" "I will be married," the princess said. "Why shouldn't I be? You were married at my age. I should be wedded and bedded, but to whom? Jonah and Roy both love me. I could take one of them, but they are both such boys. Stinger does not love me, but he makes me laugh and sometimes makes me scream. I could marry all 3 of them. Why not? Why should I have just one husband? The Conqueror had 2 wives, and Maegor had 6 or 8. She had gone too far. Jaehaerys rose to his feet and descended from the Iron Throne, his face a mask of rage. "You would compare yourself to Maegor? Is that who you aspire to be?" His Grace had heard enough. "Take her back to her bedchamber," he told his guards, "and keep her there until I send for her again." When the princess heard his words, she rushed toward him, crying, "Father, father!" But Jaehaerys turned his back on her, and Giles Morgan caught her by the arm and wrenched her away. She would not go of her own accord, so the guards were forced to drag her from the hall, wailing and sobbing and calling for her father. Even then, Septon Bart tells us, Princess Saera might have been forgiven and restored to favor if she had done as she was told, if she had remained meekly in her chambers reflecting on her sins and praying for her forgiveness. Jaehaerys and Alysanne met all the next day with Barth and Grandmaster Elisar, discussing what was to be done with the 6 sinners, particularly the princess. The king was angry and unyielding, for his shame was deeply felt and he could not forget Saera's taunting words about his uncle's wives. "She is no longer my daughter," he said more than once. Queen Alysanne could not find it in her heart to be so harsh, however. "She is our daughter," she told the king. "She must be punished, yes, but she is still a child. Where there is sin, there can be redemption. My lord, my love, you reconciled with the lords who fought for your uncle. You forgave the men who rode with Septon Moon. You reconciled with the faith and with Lord Rogar when he tried to tear us apart and put Arya on your throne. Surely you could find some way to reconcile with your own daughter." Her Grace's words were soft and gentle, and Jaehaerys was moved by them, Septon Barth tells us. Alysanne was stubborn and persistent, and she had a way of bringing the king around to her own point of view, no matter how far apart they had been at the start. Given time, she might have softened his stance on Saera as well. She would not have that time. That very night, Princess Saera sealed her fate. Instead of remaining in her rooms as she had been instructed, she slipped away whilst visiting the privy, donned a washerwoman's robes, stole a horse from the stables, and escaped the castle. She got halfway across the city to the Hill of Rainies, but as she tried to enter the dragon pit, she was found and taken by the dragon keepers and returned to the Red Keep. Alysanne wept when she heard, for she knew her cause was hopeless. Jaehaerys was hard as stone. Saera, with the dragon, was all he had to say. Would she have taken Balerion as well, I wonder? This time, the princess was not allowed to return to her own chambers. She was confined to a tower cell instead, with Jonquil Dark guarding her day and night, even in the privy. Hasty marriages were arranged for her sisters in sin. Perian Moore, who was not pregnant, was with the Jonah Mooten. "You played a part in her ruin. You can be a part of her redemption," the king told the young lordling. The marriage proved to be a success, and in time, the two became the Lord and Lady of Maidenpool. Alice Turnberry, who was pregnant, presented a harder case, as Red Roy Connington refused to marry her. "I will not pretend Stinger's bastard is my son, nor make him the heir to Griffin's Roost," he told the king, defiant. Instead, Sweetberry was sent to the Vale to give birth in a mother house on an island in Goldtown Harbor where many lords sent their natural daughters to be raised. Afterwards, she was married to Dunstan Pryor, the Lord of Pebble, an island off the Fingers. Connington was given a choice between a lifetime in the Night's Watch or 10 years of exile. Unsurprisingly, he chose exile and made his way across the narrow sea to Pentos and thence to Myr, where he fell in with sellswords and other low company. Only half a year before he might have returned to Westeros, he was stabbed to death by a whore in a Myrish gambling den. The harshest punishment was reserved for Braxton Beesbury, that proud young knight called Stinger. "I could geld you and send you to the wall," Jaehaerys told him. "That was how I served Sir Lucamore, and he was a better man than you. I could take your father's lands and castle, but there would be no justice in that. He had no part in what you did, no more than your brothers did. We cannot have you spreading tales about my daughter, though, so we mean to take your tongue. And your nose as well, I think, so you may not find the maids quite so easily to beguile. You are far too proud of your skill with sword and lance, so we will take that away from you as well. We shall break your arms and legs, and my maesters will make certain that they heal crookedly. You will live the rest of your sorry life as a cripple. Unless... Beesbury was as white as chalk. Is there a choice? Any knight accused of wrongdoing has a choice, the king reminded him. You can prove your innocence at hazard of your body. Then I choose trial by combat, Stinger said. He was, by all accounts, an arrogant young man and sure of his skill at arms. He looked about at the 7 King's Guard standing beneath the Iron Throne in their long white cloaks and shining scale and said, "Which of these old men do you mean for me to fight?" "This old man," announced Jaehaerys Targaryen. the one whose daughter you seduced and despoiled. They met the next morning at dawn. The heir to Honeyholt was 19 years of age, the king 49, but still far from an old man. Beesbury armed himself with the Morning Star, thinking mayhaps that Jaehaerys would be less accustomed to defending himself against that weapon. The king bore Blackfire. Both men were well armored and carried shields. When the combat began, Stinger rushed hard at his grace, seeking to overwhelm him with the speed and strength of youth, making the spiked ball whirl and dance and sing. Jaehaerys took every blow on his shield, however, contenting himself with defense whilst the younger man wore himself out. Soon enough, the time arrived when Braxton Beesbury could scarce lift his arm, and then the king moved to the attack. Even the best of mail is hard-pressed to turn Valyrian steel, and Jaehaerys knew where every weak point could be found. Stinger was bleeding from half a dozen wounds when he finally fell. Jaehaerys kicked his shattered shield away, opened the visor of his helm, laid Blackfire's point against his eye, and drove it deep. Queen Alysanne did not attend the duel. She told the king that she could not bear the thought that he might die. Princess Saera watched from the window of her cell. Jonquil Dark, her jailer, made certain that she did not turn away. A fortnight later, Jaehaerys and Alysanne gave another of their daughters over to the faith. Princess Saera, who was not quite 17, departed King's Landing for Old Town, where her sister Septa Maegelle was to take charge of her instruction. She would be a novice, it was announced, with the Silent Sisters. Septim Barth, who knew the king's mind better than most, would later maintain the sentence was meant to be a lesson. No one could mistake Saera for her sister Maegelle, least of all her father. She would never be a Septa, much less a Silent Sister, but she required punishment, and it was thought that a few years of silent prayer, harsh discipline, and contemplation would be good for her, that it would set her on her path to redemption. That was not a path that Saera Targaryen cared to walk, however. The princess endured the silence, the cold baths, the scratchy, rough-spun robes, the meatless meals. She submitted to having her head shaved and being scrubbed with horsehair brushes, and when she was disobedient, she submitted to the cane as well. All this she suffered for a year and a half, but when her chance came in 85 AC, she seized it, fleeing from the mother house in the dead of night and making her way down to the docks. When an older sister came upon her during her escape, she knocked the woman down a flight of steps and leapt over her to the door. When word of her flight reached King's Landing, it was assumed that Saera would be hiding somewhere in Old Town, but Lord Hightower's men combed the city door to door and no trace was found of her. It was then thought that mayhaps she would make her way back to the Red Keep to beg pardon from her father. When she did not appear there either, the king wondered if she might not flee to her former friends. So Jonah Moten and his wife, Perianne, were told to keep watch of her at Maidenpool. The truth did not come out till a year later, and the former princess was seen in a Lycene pleasure garden, still clad as a novice. Queen Alysanne wept to hear it. "They have made our daughter into a whore," she said. "She always was," the king replied. Jaehaerys Targaryen celebrated his 50th name day in 84 AC. The years had taken their toll on him, and those who knew him well said that he was never the same after his daughter Saera had disgraced and then abandoned him. He had grown thinner, almost gaunt, and there was more gray than gold in his beard now and in his hair. For the first time, men were calling him the Old King rather than the Conciliator. Alysanne, shaken by all the losses they had suffered, withdrew more and more from the governance of the realm and seldom came to council meetings any longer. But Jaehaerys still had his faithful Septim Barth and his sons. "If there is another war," he told the two of them, "it will be for you to fight it. I have my roads to finish." 2 years later, good Queen Alysanne lost yet another child, Princess Visera. Despite their differences, the loss of Princess Visera was devastating to the queen. In the space of 5 years, the gods had taken 3 of her daughters, Daela in 82 AC, Alyssa in 84 AC, and Visera in 87 AC. Prince Balon was distraught as well, wondering if he should have spoken to his sister less brusquely the night he found her naked in his bed. Though he and Aemon were a comfort to the king and queen, along with Aemon's wife, the Lady Jocelyn, and their daughter Rhaenys, it was to her own remaining daughters that Alysanne turned for solace. Miguel, 25 years of age, and Asepta took leave from her sept to stay with her mother for the rest of that year, and Princess Gale, a sweet, shy child of 7, became the Queen's constant shadow and support, even sharing her bed at night. The Queen took strength from their presence, but even so, more and more, she found her thoughts turning to the daughter who was not with her. Though Jaehaerys had forbidden it, Alysanne had defied his edict and secretly engaged agents to keep watch over her wayward child across the narrow sea. Saera was still in Lys, she knew from their reports, still at the Pleasure Garden. Now, 20 years of age, she oft entertained her admirers still garbed as a novice of the faith. There were evidently a good many Lyseni who took pleasure in ravishing innocent young women who had taken vows of chastity even when the innocence was feigned. It was her grief over the loss of Princess Visera that finally drove the Queen to approach Jaehaerys about Saera once again. She brought Septon Barth along with her to speak on the virtues of forgiveness and the healing properties of time. Only when Barth had finished did her grace mention Saera's name. "Please," she begged the king, "it is time to bring her home. She has been punished enough, surely. She is our daughter." Jaehaerys would not be moved. "She is a Lyseni whore," his grace replied. "She opened her legs for half my court, threw an old woman down the steps, and tried to steal a dragon. What more do you require? Have you given any thought as to how she got to Lys? She had no coin. How do you think she paid for her passage?" The Queen cringed at the harshness of his words, but she still would not yield. "If you will not bring Saera home for love of her, bring her home for love of me. I need her." "You need her as a Dornishman needs a pit viper," Jaehaerys said. "I'm sorry. King's Landing has sufficient whores. I do not wish to hear her name again." With those words, he rose to leave, but at the door, he halted and turned back. "We have been together since we were children. I know you as well as you know me. Right now, you are thinking that you do not need my leave to bring her home, that you could take Silverwing and fly to Lys yourself. What would you do then? Visit her in her pleasure garden? Do you imagine she will fly into your arms and beg forgiveness? She is more like to slap your face. And what will the Lyseni do if you try to make off with one of their whores? She has value to them. How much do you think it costs to lay with a Targaryen princess? At best, they will demand a ransom for her. At worst, they may decide to keep you too. What will you do then? Shout for Silverwing to burn their city down? Would you have me send Aemon and Balon with an army to see if they can prize her free? You want her, yes, I hear you. You need her, but she does not need you, or me, or Westeros. She is dead. Bury her." Queen Alysanne did not fly to Lys, but neither did she ever quite forgive the king for the words he spoke that day. Plans had been underway for some time for the two of them to make another progress the following year, returning to the Westerlands for the first time in 20 years. Shortly after their falling out, the Queen informed Jaehaerys that he should go alone. She was going back to Dragonstone alone, to grieve for their dead daughters. The maesters of that time referred to the estrangement betwixt the king and the queen as the Great Rift. The passage of time and a subsequent quarrel that was near as bitter gave it a new name, the First Quarrel. Good Queen Alysanne had loved her children. No mother ever loved a child more, Grand Maester Bennifer once told her before the shivers carried him away. In the last days of her life, Queen Alysanne reflected on his words. "He was wrong, I think," she wrote, "for surely the mother above loved my children more. She took so many of them away from me." No mother should ever have to burn her child, the queen had said at the funeral pyre of her son Valerian. But of the 13 children she bore to King Jaehaerys, only 3 of them would survive her. Aegon, Gaemon, and Valerian died as babes. The shivers took Daenerys at the age of 6. A crossbow slew Prince Aemon, Alyssa and Dela died in childbed, Visera drunk in the street. Septa Miguel, that gentle soul, died in 96 AC. Her arms and legs turned to stone by grayscale, for she had spent her last years nursing those afflicted with that horrible condition. Saddest of all was the loss of Princess Gale, the Winter Child, born in 80 AC when Queen Alysanne was 44 and thought to be well past her childbearing years. A sweet-natured girl, but frail and somewhat simple-minded, she remained with the Queen long after her other children had grown and gone. But in 99 AC, she vanished from court, and soon afterward it was announced that she had died of a summer fever. Only after both her parents were gone did the true tale come out. Seduced and abandoned by a traveling singer, the princess had given birth to a stillborn son, then, overwhelmed by grief, walked into the water of Blackwater Bay and drowned. Some say that Alysanne never recovered from that loss, for her Winter Child alone had been a true companion during her declining years. Saera had departed Lys some years before, an infamous woman but a wealthy one, and she still lived somewhere in Volantis. But she was dead to Jaehaerys, and letters Alysanne sent her secretly from time to time all went unanswered. The queen died on the first day of the 7th moon of 100 AC. A year later, Prince Balin died, so the old king called for a great council. No fewer than 14 claims were duly examined and considered. From Essos came 3 rival competitors, grandsons of King Jaehaerys through his daughter Saera, each sired by a different father. One was said to be the very image of his grandsire in his youth. Another, a bastard born to a triarch of all Volantis, arrived with bags of gold and a dwarf elephant. The lavish gifts he distributed amongst the poorer lords undoubtedly helped his claim. The elephant proved less useful. It's worth noting that Princess Saera herself was still alive and well in Volantis, and only 34 years of age. Her claim was clearly superior to any of her bastard sons, but she did not choose to press it. When asked if she meant to return to Westeros, she said, "No, I have my own kingdom here."